I mean, with someone and swingchip, someone tank player of the Florida Mayhem, of course, and swingchip assistant GM who graciously offered to translate this interview. And we meet at a pretty sweet time for you guys, I assume. Not only did you win the Pro AM, you had a 6-2 first half of the season, and you qualified pretty much on the last map against the Gladiators once again. So what did it mean for you guys to qualify for this event?
So, I haven't ever been able to play in front of Korean fans. And also, it's been over half a year since we've had an offline tournament that I've been able to play in. And so I think, I was just really desperate for both the LAN and for the fan meets, and to be able to meet my fans. And so I think one thing I can say is that I was the most kind of desperate in that server for that opportunity.
Would you have flown home anyway, even if you didn't manage to qualify?
만약에 우리가 진출을 못했다면은 그래도 한국 갔을 것 같아요. 약간 사비로.
아예 저는 안 갔을 것 같아요.
I don't think I would have gone out of pocket.
Sweet. When are you flying out?
언제 가죠, 우리?
저 이제 지금 시간으로 5시간 뒤에 합니다.
As of right now, we leave for the airport in 5 hours.
Sweet. Now, you once again have beaten the Gladiators. And this time when it mattered the most, even though you just lost to them 2 days prior, what changes did you make that you turned it around?
So whenever we lost to the Gladiators, we'd always show the same patterns and it would always follow the same frame where we kind of let them play their game. We never really got into our rhythm, or like we never really got to show off what we had in store. And then, that would just kind of spiral into this kind of defeat every time. But so that was what we focused on the most, on fixing this time. And the biggest thing was to not be scared of them this time.
Sure. Now, you've met those guys for the 4th time if you include the Pro AM. Is there a real rivalry forming? Is that something you can be felt? Like, is the match chat different? Are the scrims different if you play these guys?
I'm never one to particularly pay much attention to who exactly I'm playing against. I usually am the type of person who focuses on my own play and like making sure I'm doing things right. So no, I didn't particularly have anything in mind whenever I either play against them in scrims or in actual matches. And I especially don't think that the Glads are a difficult opponent for us. We're simply better. So I just kept focusing on improving myself and growing myself.
Sure. Now, you're once again in a situation where you have to communicate across language barriers, even though I guess it's less so the case this time around. How have you sort of determined how you come in game with RuPaul around?
Honestly, I feel like it's pretty much the same as last year. It's not a major obstacle for our team. The focal point of having a language barrier within the team is that both sides of the team need to be trying their best to communicate with each other. Because as long as both sides are trying, there's ways to find simplifications of comms and callouts and vocab. But I think the most important thing is that both sides of the language need to be trying.
Right, and the language is only one part. I remember talking to Chris Chung of the San Francisco Shock, and he said like every year they had a hybrid roster that was really hard to make it work culturally between those two groups, and it's really hard to keep people from forming groups. So what's the atmosphere like? Have you guys integrated Sauna and RuPaul there?
So, just like my answer about the language barrier, of course, there's going to be conflict, clashes, misunderstandings, friction when you have multiple cultures meshing. But just the same as the solution for the language barrier, as long as both sides are trying to get along, as long as both sides are trying their best to understand each other and, everyone's putting in the effort to kind of mesh, then, it shouldn't be a major obstacle either.
For sure. Now, you won the Pro AM. And I assume, seeing what kind of qualities you gained through the team in the pickups this season, you must have known that this roster was going to be improved. Did you think you could challenge for titles this consistently this season?
Okay. One thing that's different from last year is that this year we had a lot more restrictions with our roster in terms of like limit and like size limit and budget. But on the plus side, that means we barely have any bench time for the majority of our roster, which means everyone gets a lot more practice time and hours in scrims. And this year we did a good job in making sure that all the players we picked up were strong. So, I anticipated that we would get much better results this year, and I think right now the focal point is to make sure that we don't become complacent. As long as we don't slip up and fall into a complacency, then we should definitely be able to continue to bring good results.
For sure. Now, when I talked to Gator, he said the better the team, the less a coach has to do, and it's mostly about managing the culture. Does that mean your coaches, Gamba and Gravy, have needed to do less this season than they did in past seasons?
So I think that highly depends on which coach it is and also how they mesh, and like it depends on the team culture and stuff like that as well. But one thing I do believe in is that strong teams will always eventually start to falter, and weaker teams will always have some golden opportunity to rise up in the ranks. And so I think there is a certain limit on how high a team can go, depending just on purely on their strength of players and their strength of roster. In our case for Mayhem, our coaches are definitely working with us, and they're working, hard to make sure that they're growing and improving as well alongside of us. And so I think that it's very important that coaches are there to help you game-wise as well.
Sure. Now, one of your coaches, McGravy, stated that you got even more flexible this season, and if we look at your game time, at least during the regular season, the only heroes you haven't played in the tank role are Orisa, Roadhog, and Ball. It's probably also down to those not being really meta. Did you grind a lot in the off season in order to be able to, play this many tank heroes?
Yeah, in the off season, we don't have scrims, we don't have matches, so all we have to do is rest or practice. And so, I definitely spent my time focusing on widening my hero pool. And my biggest strength as a player, I think, is my flexibility. So I was just working hard to, sharpen that strongest tool that I have in my shed.
For sure. Now, we looked at your statistics, and one thing that stands out is that you're very seldom dying in first position. In fact, like on your picks, you die between 25 to 40% less than other NA main tanks. And especially on Monkey, you're the player that dies the least as the first of your team. So what do you think that is? Is that your ability? Is that your supports? And is that a goal of yours to not die early?
So right now we have an incredibly diverse meta, but whenever we bring out the Winston comp, it's really not a difficult comp for the tank player. So whenever I'm out on the Winston, I focus a lot on maximizing my value on the team, and the way I do that is to minimize my deaths, as well as, I try to play as safely as I can while also dealing as much damage as I can to the enemy team. You were asking if it's my personal performance or the team, and it's got to be a bit of both, but I think that's personally why my stats are looking pretty good right now.
Right. One interesting thing about your play on Winston in particular is that you're the player that holds the ultimate Primal Rage the longest in NA. Is that something you do on purpose, and or is that, explain why you use it so sparsely?
Well, this is also a pretty case-by-case kind of scenario, but most of the time, I don't use it because we simply just don't need to use it, or when we enter a team fight, I'm aware that if I use my primal now, then the next team fight becomes that much more difficult to overcome. I might need it more in the next team fight, but I don't really place any particular meaning behind it either. It's just it just happens to turn out that way.
It's interesting to see those two stats in comparison to each other, because you would think someone that dies less uses Primal Rage more. Does he think about Primal Rage more as an offensive tool or as a get out of jail card, or just to, imply pressure and tell the enemy basically, I still have it, but like you can't force it out of me, and that creates pressure in itself?
So I can't go into too much detail about this. We'd be here forever as well. But the times when it's the most tempting to use is when I can get kills out of it. But there's definitely other moments where, for example, we need to take space, or I can go harass the enemy backline, or if I go in with Primal, I can boot the team to my team. He said like a special delivery. But I think the times where I feel tempted to use it the most are also to bait cooldowns, or to also take space. But I think the focal point would be if I can definitely gain something from the enemy team by using my primal, that's when I'll pop it.
Sure. Now, we talked a lot about two NA players and coaches in other interviews. It always seems like they sort of disregard APAC as a competitive region. They think like everyone else is a little bit weaker. They're not playing the best Overwatch. Do you agree? Do you think APAC is the weaker region? And do you think still Spark and Infernal could be put up to the challenge in Midseason Madness?
So this I think is also dependent on like which teams you're talking about, but for me, I scrim with the strongest teams in the West, but I also make sure I catch up on all the APAC matches while they're happening overnight. One thing that can be said for sure is that Western teams have more variety of who they're scrimming. Like we have a lot of strong teams to choose from when we're scrimming. I think overall, like very broadly speaking, we have a better idea of like the minute details, the fine details of each strat, of each comp, etc. I don't particularly think that I see any of those kind of fine details in the Hangzhou Sparks gameplay. But when I look at Seoul Infernal, I can see that they have solid plans. I think I see that they have, minute details ironed out, like everything is all worked out. And they also have a wide variety of strats as well. I think Seoul Infernal, if they came to, if they were just placed in NA, they would be able to pull their pack a punch.
Nice. Is there any player in APAC that you studied and think you can learn something from? And is it maybe also down to Mag and his ball?
For Wrecking Ball, we haven't really had to use Wrecking Ball in matches ever, and also I think just the hero itself doesn't really mesh with our team's playstyle, so I haven't been particularly paying close attention to Mag's Wrecking Ball yet. But if I were to have to pick a player, if I had to pick a player from the APAC region, I think I'd have to pick Hanbin. Since they won the season last year, and as well as the comms videos that we can see from the Dallas Fuel YouTube videos, the way he communicates with the team, the way he puts out orders, I think he embodies what a true tank player should be like. So I'm definitely keeping a close eye on Hanbin.
Sweet. Now, it looks like Atlanta is sort of the team to beat, just given that they have a perfect record so far in the Overwatch League. They've beaten a couple of really strong teams and did so, relatively decisively. Do you agree that they are the favorites? And if you can't say your own team, who else do you think will be up there?
Okay, so for Atlanta and what you said about Atlanta looking like a very strong team, I definitely would have to agree. Hero pool wise, they have 2 tank players and they have 2 sub healers as well, flex heal players. So they don't really feel any pressure to flex, and they're all top tier in the heroes that they do cover. But I don't think that means that they're an invincible team, like an unbeatable team. I don't think that they should be allowed to rest on the balls of their heels and just relax. I think, and also your question about who's looking like the favorites to win. I can't pick us, so I'd probably say Atlanta. But after Atlanta, I think it's all up in the air. I think anyone can have a good shot at winning it all.
Sweet. Then we wish you a safe flight and thank you for the interview.
그러면 안전하게 비행기 타시고 우리 이제 오늘 인터뷰 응해 주셔서 너무 감사합니다.
Thank you so much.